So the motivation for this research came from the fact that currently there were not really any global guidelines that address the lifelong care and support necessary to maximize the benefits of cochlear implants. People had them, but we didn't know what was happening after they got them. And from that perspective, it seemed most important to talk to many of you who are in our audience today, the users. What did you as the users have to tell us? Because up to now, we haven't heard from the users. So once we got that information, then our goal was to share that information as we are today globally with professionals, policymakers, and funders so that we can improve practice and provision of service. Next slide, please, Case. We did the methodology for this research was straightforward survey research, and I'm sure some of you who are listening today helped us by participating in that survey, where we collected demographic information about users with both open and closed questions to find out areas of need, what was working, what wasn't working, what had happened for individuals with cochlear implants. In the process of developing that survey, as all research requires, we had ethical approval from York University, and we had piloted versions, early versions of the survey, where again, it was you users who helped us develop a good survey. We revised it till we finally got a version we were happy with, that we then translated into numerous languages, including Italian, French, Spanish, German, Portuguese, and Czech. And then that survey was made available through the CIICA network. And as Leo mentioned, we were really pleased that in the response to the survey, we had 1,076 respondents representing 40 countries. So that was really impressive. We thought the highest number of respondents were from Germany, followed by Australia, Brazil, the US, the UK, France, and New Zealand, but we felt we had good global coverage. And a great age range from as young as 18 up to 91 years of age. About 10% of the respondents were between 18 and 30. And what's interesting about that group, if you think about it, they were the people who got their implants probably perhaps as infants or as very young children. But the largest group of respondents were between ages 55 and 75 years, who probably got their implants a little bit later in life. 94% reported a bilateral hearing loss in both ears. And the majority, 63%, used one implant. And 55% of that group used a hearing aid in the other ear. And here's the good news when we think about our cochlear implants used. 98% of the people who responded to the survey said that they wore their CI all or most of the time. So this is something that people are using. And when we looked at the decisions, we asked people, how did you decide to get an implant? For most people, 79%, they said it was their own decision because of their hearing loss. Others talked about advice from the audiologist or surgeon, 40% and 38%. Another 34% said they'd met other CI users and that helped them make the decision to get an implant. Family influence was 20%, and maybe this wouldn't make the manufacturers so happy, but only 11% of people said that information from the manufacturers was the reason that they chose to get an implant. We also asked people how often they received fitting, mapping, and programming services in the first year of implant use, the second to fifth year, and after the fifth year. And not surprisingly, the most common number of sessions was highest in that first year. Somewhere between 4 and 6 was the most common, but the range was anywhere from as low as 1 to more than 12. And then after the fifth year of use, the most common number of sessions was just 1 a year. But again, isn't it interesting to see that the range was from none all the way to more than 12? So what that really showed us was there's wide variability in what happens for users in terms of fitting and mapping and programming. We also asked folks how often they received rehab or therapy services in the first year, second to fifth year, and after the fifth year. And this was perhaps a little more interesting in the sense that in the first year, the most common number of sessions was more than 12, which surprised me as someone living in Canada that it was more than 12. But what was interesting, the second most common response was none. So it's either seems to be feast or famine. You got more than 12 or you got none. And really, after that first year, the most common number of session responses was 0. So there wasn't a lot of therapy or support after that first year of implantation. When we asked people, did you feel the service you received was sufficient? For fitting and programming and mapping, that first slide that I showed you, 86% of people said, yeah, they thought it was okay. Even though there was such a range, most people felt it was all right. Around rehabilitation and therapy, it was still more than 50%. 68% of people said, yes, it was sufficient. But a greater number, 32%, said it wasn't maybe as much as I would have liked. So a bit more need for therapy and rehab and concern than there was for fitting and mapping and programming. Funding, as you can imagine, was a big question throughout the responses. Things cost money, implants cost money. And I won't go into detail on this slide, but I'll direct you to look at the executive summary on the CIICA website if you want to read in more detail about the report. But what you can see here that we've highlighted in red, if you look at those columns, that last column says personal. That means people who with their cochlear implants are paying for it out of their own pocket. And you can see that for things like streamers and accessories, batteries, disposable or rechargeable, spare parts, a great burden of the funding rests on the user. And that for some people, as Leo often says, if they don't have deep pockets, can be a real problem in the use of their implant over time. And when we asked people which services they thought were most important, we've kind of ranked them in order of importance. So what users told us was that regular programming, fitting, and mapping were the most important thing that mattered the most. And after that, the second most important was what we just spoke about, the funding for ongoing support to manage the implant. And then following that, access to repairs, rehabilitation, access to support for the technology, family support, and support from other users, support from a peer group. So while all of those matter, what users told us was some things seemed to matter more than others if a choice had to be made. And the slide I want to conclude with to segue into what Sue is going to talk about what does this all mean? How can we make changes? What does this tell us? Is overall, there was a high satisfaction among users with their cochlear implant. 72% of users reported they were very satisfied, and 24% were satisfied. So if you think about it, that's 98% of people saying that the implant, they're pretty satisfied with the choice to get one and that it works well for them. In terms of services, it's not quite as rosy a picture, with 56% of people saying very satisfied and 40% saying they're satisfied. But again, if you add those numbers together, that's a very high rate of satisfaction, even with services. So overall, the picture we're painting is a very good one. But as Sue always says, there's a but. There's more to say than just satisfaction rates. What else can we learn from this survey? How can this inform policy and practice going forward, which was the goal for the survey in the first place?